you're anything like me, then you are incredibly excited for the upcoming Assassin's Creed Mirage. Coming towards the end of this year in October, there's been a multitude of demos and gameplay trailers issued that make the game look amazing. But did you know that Mirage is set in Baghdad in the year 861 during what is the golden age of the city that would later be destroyed 5 centuries later at the hands of the Mongols? But what is the context that people should know before jumping into this game? And so in order to learn more about this, we jump into chapter 3 of my upcoming book, Saints and Sinners, A New History of the Middle Ages. Now this chapter is called Caliphs, Iconoclasts and Usurpers. Within the inhospitable deserts and arid mountains of the Arabian Peninsula was the home of a rich cultural heritage that was situated on the crossroads of trade and religion, and whose story can be traced as far back as the ancient Assyrian inscriptions. These people, known as Arabs, were first described as a group of tribes that were uniquely rooted in nomadism. In the centuries that followed, these tribes began to diversify, and each developed their own customs, beliefs, and practices. A rich literary tradition and culture emerged that was steeped in poetry, storytelling, and Bedouin lifestyle. Through their positioning on the intersection of 3 continents, Arabs were able to establish themselves as keen traders who interacted with civilizations across the known world from Egypt to Rome, and even as far as the Indian subcontinent and China. Despite all this, however, Arabs were detached and autonomous from one another. That is, until a merchant of the Qurayshi tribe was able to ignite a fervorous light within the hearts and minds of those scattered across the desert to unite and assert their influence beyond Arabia. Muhammad, peace be upon him, was born in the year 570 and was a contemporary to the likes of Gregory the Great and Justinian of the Byzantine world. As a young man, he laboured as a merchant across the region and developed a reputation for honesty and integrity. It was during this time that he met his first wife, a wealthy widow who was allured and impressed by his character and business acumen. Muhammad, however, was displeased by the moral and spiritual decay that he saw around him. Equally, he bore witness to the aftermath of the world in which Justinian had occupied, that sought to unify people through Christianity. Often, Muhammad would then retreat to a cave on the outskirts of Mecca to meditate and reflect, and on one such visit, when he was 40 years old, he received one of many revelations from God through the angel Gabriel. At first, he was hesitant to share the message with others through fear of isolation from his tribe. But as these revelations continued, Muhammad knew it was his mission to preach the word of God to the Arabs. Now, this was a message of monotheism, social justice, compassion, as well as a call to the end of mistreatment of poor and vulnerable. Alongside the new faith, he also established a new political order based on consultation consensus, whereby all members of the community had a voice in the decision-making process, a proto-democracy as it were. Until his death in 632, Muhammad and his followers grew in strength and numbers. In 630, they returned to Mecca triumphantly and established Islam as the dominant religion in the Arabian Peninsula. Following his death, a caliph or successor was selected to inherit the task of continuing to expand Islam and establish its prowess in the peninsula. Abu Bakr, a close friend of the Prophet, was chosen, and with it, the Rashidun Caliph dynasty was born. Abu Bakr and his successors Umar, Uthman and Ali were democratically selected through a process of shura. They embodied the ideal Islamic leadership, and under their rule, in no less than 3 decades, Islam had grown beyond the borders of modern-day Saudi Arabia to include Iran, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, as well as parts of Turkey and Libya. Nevertheless, aside from a spiritual leader, the caliphs were military commanders and political administrators that were responsible for governing the newly conquered territories. In 661, power was transferred to the Umayyads, and whilst their dynasty originated in Mecca, they would rule from the 760s from the great Syrian city of Damascus. The Umayyads led a rather controversial rule which adopted a secular view of government and thus focused primarily on a militaristic and political usage of Islam. They retained their control through vast military strength as well as political maneuvering. One such way of consolidating their power was to adopt a Western feudal tactic and divide the empire into governing provinces, essentially dukedoms, which were to be ruled over by an elected governor. These governors would exercise a variety of powers, including tax collection and law enforcement. To further the message of social justice proclaimed by the late Prophet, the Umayyads implemented a system of taxation based on wealth as opposed to religious tithes or family heritage. Equally, the Umayyads were patrons of threefold liberal arts and philosophy as they oversaw the translation and interpretation of Greek and Persian texts into Arabic and later Latin, a pursuit which would later lead to the Renaissance of Europe. Vast building projects also took place, such as the Great Marble Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, which took influence from former Roman basilicas, likely the largest in the world at the time. The ability of Muhammad to unite the tribes through a union of faith and politics quickly began to break down and create tension, however. To put it simply, Jesus was a spiritual leader, and it would not be until later centuries that Christianity took a place alongside monarchy. Even still, there was somewhat of a distinction between the church and state in Europe. But Islam, on the other hand, was somewhat different, as the Prophet, and by extension the Caliph, was a union of the two. This, however, quickly created a succession crisis from various backgrounds who believed in alternate, legitimate heirs to the throne of Islam. The Abbasids, who would come to dispose of the Umayyads, affirmed through bloodlines that they were the rightful heirs to Muhammad, as they were descendants of Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, one of the youngest uncles of Muhammad, and of the same Banu Hashim clan. Other later contenders included the Fatimids, who were a Shia Muslim dynasty that traced their lineage back to Fatima, the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, and his cousin and son-in-law Ali ibn Abi Talib, who the Shias believed would be the first caliph of the Muslim community. As such, what once united Arab peoples quickly separated them into a distinct variety of empires. This crisis, however, is the origin of the Sunni-Shia split that would cause a rift in Islam that endures until today. Returning to the Abbasids, however, they were a far more spiritual dynasty than their predecessors, and they embraced Muslims and non-Muslims, Arabs and foreigners alike, in an attempt to form an empire based on justice and equality. The capital was also moved from Damascus to Baghdad, as the site was located near both the Tigris and the Euphrates, making an ideal spot for food production that could sustain a large population. Equally, the city stood at the crossroads of 3 continents: Asia to the east, Europe to the northwest, and Africa to the southwest. This was embodied by its diverse inhabitants of Turks, Arabs, Persians, and Europeans, with the grand walls that encircled the settlement were a vast variety of markets that housed exotic spices, perfumes, and luxury goods from across the known world. Baghdad quickly became a hub of cultural, scientific and commercial activity that attracted the greatest minds to its house of wisdom. Perhaps one of its greatest achievements was implementing a system of meritocracy over bloodlines and ancestral heritage. Unlike the Umayyads, the Abbasids took a far more spiritual understanding of Islam, and thus were great supporters of Sufism, a mystical and spiritual form of Islam which emphasizes personal experience of the divine. Moreover, Sufism had a profound influence on literature and art and culture, which saw the continuation of the translation of an analysis of ancient texts to advance science, philosophy and mathematics. Altogether, Arabia was thriving, and the process from tribe to empire, which took Europe half a millennia to achieve, was achieved by Arabs in no less than a century. This, however, meant that tension and conflict began to stir on its borders as Europeans became uneasy at the sight of this new superpower. So leading up to the point in which Assassin's Creed Mirage takes place, the 7th and 8th century saw rapid expansion of Arab conquest into Europe. In the western half of the Mediterranean, Arabs were able to establish sustainable states on the shores of Sicily and Spain. They were, at this point, one of the greatest, most grand empires that was known in the known world. And so there we have it. And thus, we greatly look forward to Assassin's Creed Mirage, which comes out, I believe, in October.